Video on.
All right, good afternoon. So welcome to the CTL seminar. So we'll do it in this hybrid mode. Today we have with us Professor Saurabh Ambulkar. We're very excited to have him today for our CTL seminar. So his research focuses on resilient and responsible supply chains. He received his PhD from the Iowa State University and has published his work in prominent journals such as POM, JOM, IGPR, International Journal of Physical Distribution Logistics Management, International Journal of Purchasing and Supply Management, and many others. He serves on the editorial review boards of JOM and Decision Sciences Journal. His research has been cited several thousand times, and he has also earned the honorable mention for the Ambassador Award by the JOM Journal. Before UT Arlington, where he's currently as an assistant professor, he was also with Northeastern and University of Dayton. So alongside his academic career, he also had a practical experience with Mahindra & Mahindra and Frost & Sullivan. So today he already interacted with several of you in the morning for the doctoral workshop, but today he'll be talking with us on his specific research work which is going on, which is on supplier and customer on the board, and the impact on environmental performance under supply chain upstream, downstream, and financial pressures, right? So with this, I will give the floor and the Zoom both to Saurabh. Saurabh, please, it's yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Devjit, for that kind introduction. It's great and honor to be here and to present to you. Thank you for taking the time to join, both who are here in person and those who have joined us on the Zoom session. I'm excited to kind of present this study that I'm currently working. It's still a work in progress, but we are looking at the role of supplier and customer on the board and how they influence a firm's environmental performance. So the So the research motivation for this study, right? The whole how businesses operate we're seeing a tremendous change in it, especially over the last decade, right? Companies are realizing that consumers are becoming more and more environmentally conscious. They care for the environment. They are looking for firms that provide a sustainable alternative, right? And so companies realize that going forward, it's going to be very difficult to operate in a society that is not very inclusive, that doesn't focus on climate change and the environment, right? So here's an example of what L'Oreal's executive vice president and their chief corporate responsibility officer is saying, that we're very much focused on reducing our CO2 emissions, and they've reduced it from their production by 73% from 2005 to 2017. So UN SDGs came in 2012, and you can see that as a regulatory push, but companies back in 2005 are also thinking about how to improve on their environmental performance. And because not only consumption demand is changing, demand patterns are changing, there is also a shortage of resources. So unless companies be very sustainable in their production and in consumption, it's going to be very, very difficult going forward. Other motivation, a lot of stakeholders, there is a lot of demand from the customer side for being more environmentally conscious. So recent BCG survey says 49 to 80% of the consumers are concerned about the climate and environment. So market is asking companies to think more about the environment or so forth. There's even another study by McKinsey, very recent, which looks at Gen Zs and millennials, and which looks at 59% of the millennials and about almost I think it was 59% of the Gen Z consumers and 72% of the millennials are worried about the environment and are looking for sustainable alternatives within the products and services they consume. So there is a lot of push from the market for companies to be sustainable. On the other hand, from the supply side, there's a competition for resources, right? Natural resources. Here I have an example of Vitesco Technologies, which I think all of you may know Continental Tires, Continental, right? German automotive group. So their Continental powertrain became Vitesco Technologies in 2019. And they use a lot of water in manufacturing of these powertrains. And typically they're operating in Mexico and USA. These areas are areas where there's a lot of drought, they're water-stressed areas. And so they know that operating in these areas, they have to be very, very efficient about how they use water, how they treat water, and so forth. So they're very, very they're constantly thinking about natural, sustainable consumption of these natural resources. On the other hand, now companies are not only competing within themselves, companies are also competing with their consumers. So in the Cayama Valley near Santa Barbara, 3 hours away from LA, very, very rich agriculture area, a lot of farms, and so corporates, growers are growing carrots, and growing carrots requires a lot of water. And so they're facing a lot of pushback from the citizens who are living in that particular area. And they say that, hey, we're not going to buy any more carrots, and we're going to stop consuming carrots because these carrots are taking up the water that we require for our livelihood. So the tension is not only within firms, but it is also within consumer groups, right? So it's very, very challenging. Now, apart from this tension, we also know that consumers are willing to pay a premium. So market is actually rewarding you to be sustainable, to be environmentally conscious. And so for companies that are facing a challenge and are looking for newer growth opportunities, providing an environmentally conscious proposition or products can actually maybe be beneficial for them. Now, good companies are thinking, companies want to be environmentally conscious. However, enhancing environmental performance is very hard. Why? First, it requires a lot of investment, right? And if we look at prior research or just in general think about, hey, we want to do something about the environment, we know that we are going to face some kind of a short-term increase in our operational costs, right? And do we want to take that? Do we don't want to take that? That's a big question. Second, a lot of supply chain implications, right? Traceability within supply chain is very hard. COVID kind of made that even more evident, right? Everyone is talking about transparency. Where are we getting our products from? Who are our third tier, fourth tier suppliers? What kind of operations are they having? And if we look at, there was a recent survey done in the supply chain management review. Most firms have access only to their first or second tier suppliers, right? But we know that majority, if we talk about these scope 2 emissions, scope 3 emissions, these are almost beyond those second or third tier supply chain, right? So here the recent paper is saying that 2/3 of the firm's environmental footprint lies with lower tier suppliers. And we don't have access to those suppliers. Those suppliers are maybe not willing to work with us, or we don't even know where they are located. So doing anything with them is very, very challenging. I have a very interesting example here. When I used to work with Frost and Sullivan, at that time I can't name the company. So company is working in the semiconductor space, and they don't want to deal with conflict minerals. And so they go to their supplier in Congo and say, we want to make sure that you're using responsibly the materials. These are not coming from any kind of poor working conditions and those kind of reasons. And the supplier there says, who are you? I don't care what you tell me, because I don't want to deal with you. I'm supplying to an X party from whom you are buying. So there are these group purchasing organizations that are buying chips for multiple organizations, and so Intel buys from them from a discount. Now, Intel, even though such a big company and such a big player in the market, is unable to dictate terms to the suppliers. And so getting suppliers to work on your environmental initiatives is very, very hard, right? Walmart has been recently successful, but initially they also faced a lot of pushback. They wanted to introduce blockchain for food security, and suppliers initially didn't want to do it because the margins are so small. Why invest in new technology when you're going to earn less than 50 cents on a, just some cilantro or coriander you're selling in the market? It's very, very difficult. So we are seeing a lot of examples where companies are moving back on their climate change initiative, DEI initiatives. Only I think few days back I read about this farm equipment manufacturing company in Tennessee. It's called Tractor Supply, and they said that our consumers don't really care, is what they felt, and they felt that it's taking away too much of their attention from the core business, and so they said we are pulling back on our DEI and climate change initiatives, and we're going to focus on those kind of resources back to the original business, right? So we see these kind of things also happening. So it's very hard to get companies, get suppliers on board to work actually on these environmental initiatives. Right, so here's a recent post, right? So this post is saying that there's a perception that corporate energy is going into ESG initiatives rather than core business, creating a negative impact on companies' results. So a survey was done, prior to this OpenAI ChatGPT, and everyone said the top most priority for us is sustainability, environmental performance. As soon as AI came into picture and technology, the whole thing went into backlight. Now companies are investing more in AI, right? They feel that that's going to help them grow their business. So this kind of a tension between the core business and something like environmental performance always seems to be existing between for these firms. And so if you look at what work has been done on environmental performance and sustainability, we find two streams of research. One, that market is always rewarding environmental performance, right? So if you see firms that win environmental rewards see abnormal stock returns, it makes sense to make environmental performance objectives as operations objectives. Firms that are having emission reductions are seeing better returns on the market. So market is rewarding always sustainable behavior. Now, in terms of what are the antecedents to this environmental performance, we see that these antecedents, many corporate social performance, strategic human resource management, political expenditures, board expertise, board composition, diversity aspects, right? All of them have shown to have some kind of an influence, mostly positive, onto environmental performance. So where does our kind of research fit in? Right. Now, if we look at one of the challenges for achieving sustainability or environmental performance for firms, it is the management, right? It is the management as what is required to be done and what is actually being done, right? And there is usually a very significant gap between this. So here is a McKinsey report example. 60% of the firms know that they have to do better, but they don't have an environmentally aligned strategy. Right. And now who is responsible for building these environmentally aligned strategy? We would assume the board of directors, given that they are in this advising role and they are in this kind of an guiding the C-suite into making these kind of decisions, which will be not only, help the companies grow, but also help the companies be more responsible. So this is very, very important. Now, two areas where we see that there can be there can be improvement in terms of companies building better environmental performance is definitely integrating sustainability in research and development, integrating sustainability or making environmentally conscious products and providing those kind of services to consumers. The other is the choice of materials and getting suppliers. You want to reduce your carbon footprint within your supply chain. So getting suppliers on the board is very, very important. So when we look at this, then the question arises that what if I have representatives of suppliers and customers on my board of directors, right? My suppliers are my stakeholders, my customers are my stakeholders, and I have their representatives on my board of directors. So in 2002, US had passed an act, which is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which I think very popular. Many of you already may be familiar with it. And the idea behind that act was to have majority independent directors in the board of directors, right? So that companies, investors, their interests are protected. They are not kind of, there is no fraudulent activities being happening and so on and so forth. There's greater monitoring, but more oversight and so forth. Now, since then, a lot of research has looked at the role of these independent directors, what is their functional expertise, what is their gender, what are the connections they have, and so forth. And very recently, if you look at Kinney et al. 2013, I think, Review of Finance started looking at directors that come from related industries, right? So for a company, we can think of related industry meaning supply is a related industry, customer is a related industry, and they saw that that is beneficial to them. And so we too did some work on this, primarily looking at, is it beneficial for firms to have a supplier on the board and customer on the board, right? And the very first thing is, why should companies have them? Well, if I have to convince a company to have someone on the board of directors, they need to say, are we making money? Yeah, and the research has shown that they are, right? So we see that presence of a supplier on the board of directors has a positive influence on companies' ROA. So short-term profitability is good, right? And this in my supplier on the board, the Palms paper 2022, we also show that the effect is more so when the companies are facing an efficiency crisis, right? So companies that are not very efficient see this to be more. On the other hand, if we look at the presence of a customer on the board, we see that the customer on the board to have a more long-term outlook, and they have a very positive effect on the Tobin skew, right? So they have a very good market orientation. They are the representative for the customers, and they're always looking for something that is going to give a long-term performance, right? And so Bomaraju et al., the Journal of Marketing paper, shows that COTB also is beneficial for customers. So we know the reasons why companies may think of having suppliers or customers on their board of directors, because there is, there is a benefit to the company's financial performance. So the questions that we wanted to ask is, go back one slide, is, is there any benefit apart from financial performance in terms of environmental performance, right? And so for this paper to look at this particular relationship, we are looking at stakeholder theory, because of course suppliers and customers are company stakeholders, and SOTB and COTB act as representatives of those stakeholders. Right, so let's see whether supplier on the board and customer on the board have an effect on firms' environmental performance. And we hypothesize that a supplier on the board has a more operational focus, is focused on short-term profitability, like we've seen. And so they are going to prioritize companies' efficiency, they're going to prioritize supply chain efficiency over long-term environmental performance. And so having a supplier on the board may lead to a negative effect on environmental performance. On the other hand, market values sustainability, market values environmental performance. So a customer on the board is a representative of the customers, and may be more open to that, maybe given that they are very long-term focused, understand the business value of being more environmentally conscious. And so having a customer on the board may lead to a positive influence on the environmental performance of the company. So these are two basic hypotheses. Now, how do these relationships change when there is stakeholder pressure? And how do we look at stakeholder pressure? For this relationship between supplier on the board and environmental performance, we'll look at an upstream supply chain pressure, which is the cost of goods sold intensity, right? So if COGS intensity is very high, what it is indicating that there is a lot of costs involved in the company's production, company's raw materials, and so forth. So if a lot of finance is actually involved in that, then do companies have enough to invest for their environmental performance, right? Now, given the existing focus of supplier on the boards on supply chain efficiency, that focus is going to get further enhanced when there is this kind of an upstream supply chain pressure, right? And so we argue that this relationship between having a supplier on the board and environmental performance is going to further worsen when there is a high upstream supply chain pressure, which is through COGS intensity. Similarly, if I'm looking at the downstream pressure, I said let's look at sales volatility, right? If there is too much uncertainty in the market, then firms need to be more sensitive to what the customer's preferences and demands are, right? And so when we have a customer on the board, they can use this as an opportunity to include environmental preferences, right? Because the customer base is evolving, they are prioritizing more environmentally conscious options, and a COTB being their representative can help ensure that these kind of options are integrated into firms' operations. So the positive relationship between customer on the board and environmental performance, we believe, will be enhanced when there is greater sales volatility, so greater downstream pressure as well. Now, apart from these supply chain pressures, a company also can feel financial pressures coming from financial stakeholders. And to measure that, we look at leverage. Leverage is basically the amount of debt compared to the assets that the company is holding. So if leverage is high, then a lot of companies' finances are basically, debt financed, and so there is greater financial pressure. If there is greater financial pressure, what do we expect for the existing relationships to change? We will expect that given that COGS intensity is adding to the pressure under leverage, that interaction will go further negative because now we see that the pressure has increased. When it comes to the customer on the board, now, if there is greater leverage, we are looking for new revenue streams. We are looking for new areas where companies can grow their market, gain new market share. And this can be seen as an opportunity for a company to appeal to more environmentally conscious customers or provide options that can tap into a further new customer. So we believe that leverage will again act as a moderator to these existing relationships, and we see that the negative effect of supplier on the board on environmental performance with COGS intensity will get further worsened, and in the case of customer on the board, those existing relationships will get further enhanced, right? So this is our research model that we wanted to test. So to test this particular research model, we use data from the KLD Environmental Social Governance dataset that is existing, ExuComp, Institutional Shareholder Services, and CompuStat, right? So these are getting data on the TMT, on the board, on the environmental performance and firm performance variables. So we have a panel data set from 2007 to 2013 on B2B firms. And why B2B? Because we're looking at both supplier and customer on the board. And for a B2C firm, customer on the board may not make any sense, right? You're consumers. So we look primarily at only B2B firms that are listed on the S&P 900 index. And so our sample size is around 2043 firm year observations. So environmental performance. So if you look at KLD dataset, it's very widely used, widely cited. Almost, if you look at the research in management and very recent research in operations and supply chain area too, it's very heavily used. What KLD data does is basically it has a set of variables on environmental side, social side, and so forth, where it lists certain strengths. And so here are example of strengths like beneficial products and services, pollution prevention, recycling, clean energy, communications. And it also lists concerns, so hazardous waste, regulatory problems, ozone depleting chemicals, and so forth. And what it basically gives is a rating of 1 or 0. 1 meaning that the strength or the concern is existing, 0 meaning it doesn't exist for that particular company, right? And so there are about 7 strengths and 7 concerns that we found for all the firms that were there within our sample. And the way we measure environmental performance is in line with our past, with the existing past research that is there, which looks at the total environmental strengths minus the total environmental concerns. So if a negative score is there, then there are more concerns for the firm. If there's a positive score, we would expect that strengths are more than the concerns. Now, supplier on the board and customer on the board is basically a binary variable, 1 that they are there on the board of directors, 0 that they are not there on the board of directors. COGS intensity is just cost of goods sold over net sales. Very important to include net sales because as companies are growing, we would expect their COGS also to grow because to fulfill that growth. So it's very important to keep it with the net sales. And leverage is basically debt over assets, very standard. We control for a lot of variables at the firm level. We look at market concentration, firm size, R&D intensity. We also have the customer on the board, so we control for the SGA, sales, general, and administrative expenses. We look at the lag of the environmental performance variables for the past 2 years to avoid autocorrelation. And then we also control for factors at the board level, board size, diversities, different kind of diversities that exist, board governance, which kind of looks at whether the CEO is the chair of the board or not a chairman of the board. And we also control for factors at the TMT size, gender diversity, whether the firm has a COO and a chief supply chain officer or not, whether the firm has a chief marketing officer or not, right? Because we would assume that they may take a substituting role to a supplier on the board and customer on the board as well. So we control for them as well. So a regression equation, which basically looks at the effect of SOTB and COTB on environmental performance and their interaction with the moderating variables. And so what we find here is that supplier on the board has a negative effect on the environmental performance, and the customer on the board has a positive effect on environmental performance. These effects are further enhanced, in the sense worsened for the SOTB and enhanced, amplified for COTB, when there is greater COGS intensity and then there is greater sales volatility. So the supply chain pressures are actually kind of amplifying the existing relationships that are already there. And then we see in terms of leverage that it does affect the interaction between COTB and sales volatility, but we didn't see any effect for the SOTB's role. Now, at this point, we were thinking, why is a customer on the board influenced and why a supplier on the board may not be influenced? And one thought that came to my mind is the level of integration with the suppliers, right? So if companies are operating in smaller markets with maybe 1 or 2 products, right, then they may be very integrated within their suppliers. And so suppliers may be very much interested in reducing the debt levels of the companies. And so at that particular time, maybe the amount of financial debt that a company has is not playing on supplier on the board, right, and SOTB's mind, and they don't take it into consideration. So maybe we want to check on that, and we will as we go on to the next slides. So this was our initial set of results that we got. Now we wanted to kind of check, and so we check and we check for the moderating effects, and we see that as COGS intensity is increasing, the effect of supplier on the board on the environmental performance decreases, which is here. And in the case of customer on the board, we see an increasing as sales volatility increases. Right. Now, we know that leverage affects only customer on the board. And so if we look at low amount of debt or low amount of leverage, we see pretty much a straight line, right? So it's not affecting it too much, right? However, as under high amounts of debt, we see that there is a greater motivation to include more environmentally conscious products and services in your portfolio. Right? We want to increase the environmental performance. So then we do a bunch of robustness tests to make sure that our results are actually indicating what they are and are not showing any kind of bias. So the first step was to check for selection bias. Why selection bias? Because we are picking companies that have a customer on the board and a supplier on the board. So we run a Heckman correction model. We include the inverse Mills ratios based on the SOTB selection and on COTB selection. And we find that the results continue to hold the way they are holding, right? So it kind of gives us a little that maybe selection bias is not so much of a concern for us. Then we check for endogeneity due to omitted variables, different factors that may influence environmental performance that we don't consider within our model. And we control for that by creating instrument variables using the Lubel's 2012 suggested HBIV approach. And we create basically 5 instruments for each of these 5 independent and moderating variables that we have in our model. We test for whether they are weak identifiers or they're strong instrument variables. We see that they're strong and we can use them, and we go ahead and put them in our model. And even under their presence, our results don't seem to change, suggesting that omitted variables are probably not that big of a concern. Next, what we are measuring is it just a simple observational correlational effect, or can we actually have some kind of causal interpretation of the results? So we use basically matching technique, and we match SOTB and COTB both on both sides, market concentration and asset turnover, right? And we repeat the analysis first with the matching on SOTB. The results continue to be the same. Then we match it on COTB, and we find the results continue to be the same, right? So matching also gives us very consistent set of results. Then the question on whether being and having a good environmental performance is motivating companies to get their suppliers and customers on the board, right? So maybe the motivation to have them is maybe my poor environmental performance or my good environmental performance. So we check for that. And interestingly, we see nothing for COTB, but we see a weak kind of an effect for SOTB. So companies that are facing, maybe as their environmental performance is increasing or is getting better, they want to engage a supplier on the board, right? However, as we've already seen in our the original results, that may not be in their best interest, because getting a supplier on the board is beneficial when companies are having lower operational efficiency. And so supplier on the board is better from that aspect, but maybe actually not so much helpful when it comes to environmental performance. We saw a negative result. So companies are actually hiring, or there seems to be some kind of a relationship there between better environmental performance and then getting a supplier on the board, but that may not be in the best interest of the company, because a customer on the board is doing a better job, or seems to be, having a better positive influence on environmental performance of the firm. So then we talked about leverage not having an effect on suppliers on the board, effect on environmental performance. And one of the reasoning I thought was maybe it's how well integrated the supply chain is. And so we decided that let's look at diversification as also a moderator. And diversification may matter more because if companies are working in diversified markets, then there are a greater number of stakeholders, right? And if there are a greater number of stakeholders, there may be more moving parts within the supply chain. And so it is very likely that you don't have a very strong integrated supply chain, right? Like you would have if it was a single product or something, or a single market, right? And so past research has also kind of talked about that diversification pushes managers towards an extreme of caution. Managers try to make safe decisions when the firms are very, very diversified, right? And so what we see is with diversification, we see that that there is the negative impact between SOTB, COGS intensity, and diversification is negative and significant. So greater the diversification, the supplier on the board is more cautious in their decision making, and is making, again, decisions that are favoring too short-term, maybe operational focus, and leaving environmental performance out of the picture, or not thinking about them, right? Sometimes you may think that this is going to come at the cost of operational costs, and we don't want to do it. So we see that negative effect there, and just suggesting that diversification may be actually influencing the SOTB's role. So our findings from the study, that presence of a customer on the board is beneficial to the environmental performance. Supplier on the board is negatively influencing environmental performance. And supply chain pressures are actually enhancing these existing behaviors or relationships that are there, right? So we have, if downstream market pressure, we see a more positive customer on the board and environmental performance relationship. And COGS intensity, we see a further strong negative relationship. Now, these relationships are again influenced by both financial pressure and market in terms of diversification. Diversification increases supply chain pressure, which further amplifies the negative influence of SOTB on environmental performance. Financial pressure companies are looking for new revenue streams, and so that they in terms of financial pressure coupled with downstream market pressure is making is incentivizing customer on the board to focus more on the environment so that companies can tap into the premium or the into a greater market presence. Okay, so yeah, that is pretty much it. We don't have to go to it. So thank you. That was my study. Yeah, and if you have any questions, both online or here, I'm open to it.
So we have two questions
Sure.
from the online audience. One is, on which industry did this study focus on?
Yeah, so it was a heterogeneous sample. It's an S&P 900 index. So there are firms from different industries that are there: technology, manufacturing, aerospace. Yeah.
The next question is, where and how do we apply the results of this study?
Yeah, so the results of the study are very, the implications are in terms of your board composition, right? So companies have to think about whom we hire as an independent director. And that is a very important choice. Oftentimes that is the decision. If you look at a board composition, typically it is filled with mostly financial, legal, or accounting experts. There are very few functional experts on the board. And however, if we look at past research, it is always beneficial to have certain more functional experts on the boards as well, those coming from maybe marketing, those coming from operations, those coming from HRM as well, as they may be able to kind of do help companies in a better advising role as well, right? So here, when we are looking at the appointment of independent directors, one aspect to look at it is also looking at directors from the related industries, right? And we already know what financial benefits they bring to the company, but here, if companies are trying to be more environmentally conscious, they can look at these directors from related industries and see what kind of influence they have. So that's the implication of this study.
Next question is, having supplier or customer on board, is it a strength or a negative in terms of knowing all financial data?
Well, yeah, so a good question, right? Now, having a supplier on a customer, whenever someone is on your board of directors, they are kind of they're there to safeguard the interests of the investors of that particular company. So, one example I gave today morning, and we can talk about now, is if there is a conflict of interest, like Elon Musk was on the board of OpenAI but decided to step down, given that Tesla is also working on a similar product, you have to do that because there is a conflict of interest, right? But a supplier and a customer on the board may not be working typically in your area. They're in a related industry. And if they are on your board of directors, then it may be beneficial to have them, especially when you're facing certain challenges and you want suppliers to be much more integrated with you and your customers to be much more integrated with you, to involve them with their operations. So good examples I can see are like Toyota and Denso. They have a very long-standing relationship, and they are also on each other's board of directors. I think that's, yeah.
Moving forward, one more question. Can we collect the same kind of data from Bloomberg as well?
So in terms of environmental performance, Bloomberg has data on environmental performance, so you can collect it. In terms of finding who the suppliers are and customers, Bloomberg has supply chain data. So yes, you can do that as well. However, finding if your supplier is on your board of directors or not, that information is not there in Bloomberg. They have to manually collect it using 14 DEF, which is a filing that they have to do with the SEC. So that requires manual data collection.
So we have another question. Is this applicable for the construction industry?
Good question. So I'm trying to see. I would, from a supply side, I would think very, very applicable. From a customer side perspective, it's a residential construction industry or industrial construction industry will matter, so and so forth, right? I think what kind of market are we dealing with will matter. From a construction industry standpoint, actually very it's I think very applicable because EPA regulations or environmental regulations in general are becoming very stricter, right? So especially in a country like United States, we are seeing a lot of residential construction happening, but we are not seeing a lot of industrial construction happening. Why? Because EPA is getting more stricter on the particulate matter and what should be the air level quality and so forth. And that may not have a direct, but is having an indirect implication on what kind of construction, what kind of technology, and how we deal with it there and therefore, right? So environmental performance definitely very applicable to the construction industry. So I think this will also be very applicable to them.
Thank you, sir. Last question. Whom in the organization do you suggest should play an active role in selecting the directors, either from customers or suppliers?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
Whom in the organization do you suggest should play an active role in selecting the directors, either from customers or suppliers?
Well, the existing board of directors, right? They will make that call in terms of whom we are going to get in, and of course there is going to be some kind of a session with them that they will decide whether to get a supplier or a customer on the board and so forth, right? Again, the focus being what is it that the company is seeking. Our research shows that for short-term financial performance, having a supplier on the board, especially when you're lacking supply chain efficiency and want to build supply chain competence, is good, right? For companies that are facing more downstream market challenges where they're trying to build long-term profitability, where they have a long-term vision, where they want to be more market-oriented and understand that better, but then having someone from the customer on the board may be beneficial for them.
So that covers the questions from the online audience.
So those are great questions. And one thing I'd like to point out, right? I think that's if you go to the original set of results, given that these questions were being asked, that if we don't see any effect or the interaction of supplier on the board and customer on the board, right? So is there any kind of a synergy coming into play for a firm that has both? We didn't see much of an effect, right? Individually, they seem to have an effect both on financial and on the environmental performance, but having both of them within a single firm we didn't see much of it making any difference, right? Then we didn't find. But also, I would, in my mind, just recalling the data, see a small number where companies have both supplier and customer on the board of directors. Very, very unique. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
We started off by looking at the effect of supplier on what kind of theory was going on in the mind and what the anticipated and where it's coming.
Yeah, so this basically came from my last paper, which was looking at the effect of supplier on the board and buyer firms' financial performance, and we saw that it is a positive effect. And the effect is more so positive when firms were having lower operational efficiency, right? So clearly, when a supplier on the board is going to bring in certain kind of an operational expertise, is going to talk about inventory management, is going to talk about lead times and all of that. And so it makes sense that if you have a lower operational efficiency, having someone with an operations and a supply chain expertise is going to enhance, right? Now, on the other hand, there was existing research on customer on the board, which showed that, not to an ROA, but Tobin skew, which is a more long-term performance metric, we see a positive effect. And then, so to the question that we had when we did our original paper was, companies are hiring them for these financial performance benefits, and they can make these decisions. But is there any additional? Because our paradigm is changing, right? We are not only thinking about now just about profit, right? We also have to think about the planet, given that there is so much going on in terms of resources becoming less and customers being more environmentally conscious and so on and so forth. Is there any benefit of having these customers and suppliers, right? These people on the board of directors to the environmental performance as well, given that a lot of our operations are within the supply chain, and will be going forward, it's going to be with the customer as they are the consumer of our products and services. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so customers being on your board of directors. Yeah, so again, so Toyota, like I said, on board of directors of Denso, right? Now, sometimes it is beneficial in terms of it is you have a very strong relationship and you have a very long-standing relationship, and that relationship is based on trust. But what we've seen is also having a customer on the board helps you better with your forecasting, with your demand planning kind of an operations, because they are coming in with their market, and also anticipating what kind of market changes will be coming, because that's the kind of an advisory expertise that the customer is bringing in, right? They are more closer to the market. So predicting what changes and what demand patterns we can see in the market becomes a little bit easier for the firm. Yeah. So so even in this, we see from a shift towards environmentally focus, we know that market values it, and the customer on the board being that representative of those customers, right? The customers are the stakeholders, and the COTB is that representative of those stakeholders. Is actually seems, at least our research shows, is helping firms better understand that, and is kind of guiding towards better environmental performance. And on the other hand, on the supplier on the board, we see very, very cost and supply chain efficiency focus, where they want to become much more operationally efficient. And at that point, it may be, even investments in environment, which may be more, which may have benefits in the longer term, may not be that visible at this point, and they may be kind of overlooking that at this point. That's what we see. Yes.
What is your opinion on regenerative supply chain practices and environmental performance?
Well, the opinion is it's positive, right? So you want to do it, and it is beneficial. I think it's also very important to think from it in terms of the type of industry and the type of product that the company is dealing with, and what kind of are they of reaping these benefits, right? And so every investment in an environmentally conscious kind of a option comes at some kind of an operational cost, right? So whether that company is willing to take that operational cost or not is something that should be definitely considered whenever we look at these kind of questions. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all, for especially all the online audience as well as all the offline here, for joining this wonderful webinar. So thank you so much for coming all the way
Thank you
from
so much
Iowa
for
State.
having me.
Have a wonderful stay at Ahmedabad.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can host you again sometime.
Definitely,
Yeah?
would love that.
Thank you so much. And others, before you leave, you can take a picture all together before you leave. Oh, thank you. It's a small token for your
thank you so much.
talk to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so
much.
much.